Greetings, family. Welcome to the AfrikanExodus show. I'm your host, Tony Cherie, here to you with a new video. This is the Conspiracy to Erase a Nation segment. This segment is based on a book that I wrote earlier this year called Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. The book is available on Amazon and breaks down the true reality that the biblical land of Yasharel, or Israel, was really located inside of East Africa, not in Palestine. So if you want to see a mini PDF version of the book, you can go to my Telegram. It's in a pinned comment on the top. There you can download it for free. So we're at a very important juncture of this journey, and I'm getting excited because we're nearing the point where I can say, okay, I think we're done as far as hitting the major points that I hit inside of the book. This juncture that we're at, after talking about the people who are not Hebrews, who have masked themselves as being Hebrews, such as people like inside of a religion known as Judaism, now we're going to talk about the people who actually were the Hebrews. What happened to them? Where were they dispersed? In what way were they dispersed? Were they dispersed inside of the African continent first, as I'm going to show you? Yes, absolutely. That was the first dispersion that we have to understand. Now, we had to talk about, obviously, the slave trades because we know that this dispersion from scripture was going to be through the four corners of the earth. And so that means the dispersion is going to be all the way in the east and all the way in the west, which did happen to biblical Yasharel. And so now we have to talk about the internal dispersion that preceded that. Some of that obviously was caused by things like the Arabs, but others of this was caused by internal issues happening inside of Yasharel. Strongly encourage you all to watch previous presentations if you are missing out on the information, because we talked about a number of things that were done already to disperse the Hebrews internally inside of Yasharel. We talked about Gudit, who was a Jewish queen, some call her the Queen of Beta Israel, who essentially destroyed the Axum Empire. And of course, the Axum Empire was the true Yasharel, or at least the reunification or the return of the tribe of Yehuda or the tribe of Judah. So she is known to have destroyed the Axum Empire, leading to its eventual demise. Also, we talked about the fact that the people who were originally of the region, the Oromo, have been dispersed continually by oppressive forces inside of the Abyssinian empires. So whenever this is happening, you have the people of Yasharel, the Yahudim, who are being dispersed out of East Africa. The question is, where do they go first, and who do they mesh with? The people who we're going to talk about today, who it seems that they first really meshed with, was the Bantu people. Now, there's a lot of people inside of the Bantu Israelite movement who take the position that Bantu in themselves are Hebrews. Essentially, everyone that is Bantu is a Hebrew. Now, I did not take that position. However, I understand that belief because if you study the Bantu people, you see so many Hebrewisms culturally inside of the language, so much that resembles Hebrewisms, where you would say, okay, this must be the scattered tribes of Yasharel. Not to mention the fact that so many people who were victims of the slave trades were either Bantu or meshed in with Bantu culturally, or also as far as their DNA or as far as their lineage. Like a lot of those people became victims of slave trades. So it's obvious that Bantu are related to the Hebrews. But again, I don't take the position that they themselves are Hebrews just because the evidence of that, it's like, where do you find it? Now, let's talk about where they do relate absolutely to the Hebrew dispersion. First and foremost, inside of modern scholarship, Bantu is not considered an ethnic term. Now, I understand that there's a lot of similar qualities that we can identify from Bantu-speaking people, but in modern scholarship, it's not an ethnic term. But rather, it's a language identification that relates to several hundred ethnic groups. Bantu language, it constitutes a subdivision of the Benue Niger sector of the Niger-Congo division of the Niger-Kordofanian language family. Okay, a lot of big names, a lot of language families, and it can get confusing, so we have to go through this slowly. Now, the Kordofanian language is geographically separate from the rest of the Niger-Congo languages, and it's believed to have originated in the Nuba Hills of southern Sudan. Now, let us take a moment and look at where the Nuba Hills are in southern Sudan. Now, I have stated previously that the Bible speaks about, obviously, the nation Edom that bordered biblical Yasharel. And specifically, it talks about a place called Mount Sur. I've said previously, and I believe this probably is the case, that Mount Sur would probably be the Nuba Mountains, because if you look at where Yasharel was in comparison to where Edom would have been, they would have been neighbors. And we see this major mountain range inside of Sudan, probably Mount Sur. Hard to know, obviously, though. So this region, though, obviously, again, borders Yasharel. So they have attributed the Cordophonian languages to this region, so close in proximity to where we know the kingdom of Yasharel was. Similarly, you're going to see really a complete dispersion of people who are speaking this Sudanic languages of families, people who have this Sudanic origin side of their languages. So this is going to be something that you're going to see all the way in West Africa, despite the fact that Sudan is all the way in East Africa. So this is where the dispersion is happening. And you can see it happening really whenever there's also another dispersion of people who are Bantu. Now, something that's interesting about Bantu, it's actually one of the younger languages that come out of the Niger-Congo languages. Although while it is younger, it is really an influential language chain because 30% of Africans, it is estimated, speak Bantu languages. So let's return to the Oromo. As I said, the Oromo people, clearly Hebrews, okay? And when you look at the Oromo people, they have something similar inside of their language, despite the fact that, again, they're originating inside of Ethiopia. They have something very similar in their language that relates to the same usage that would be used by people who are Bantu. So the Oromo has two tones, high and low tone, which don't serve to make lexical distinctions, but morphological or syntactical ones. Tones are not marked in the script. As Proto-Afro-Asiatic was probably non-tonal, Oromo must have acquired them through contact with Nilo-Saharan or Niger-Congo languages. So this leads to the question, when did the Oromo encounter a Niger-Congo language? Well, again, you see this with the Bantu. So something very interesting, many people have different theories about the Bantu. Did they originate inside of West Africa? That seems to be the majority consensus as far as scholars. Of course, that doesn't mean that we have to believe it, but that's the majority consensus. Also, there's some people who have argued that the Bantu actually originated in Egypt and they migrated downward and then towards the Central Africa and then expanded up. There's that theory as well. It's hard to say from which direction definitively. However, we do know that they did migrate in a mass migration. Some people have speculated that the migration happened a long time ago, 4,000 years ago. That is the majority consensus as well. However, I would subscribe to the late split theory, meaning that they did not split 4,000 years ago. They actually split off into different places in the African continent pretty much more recently. So I'm reading from Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. About the late split theory, it says, using genomic data, scientists Etienne Patin and Luis Quintana revealed that Bantu speakers from Eastern and Southern African populations are genetically more similar to populations based south of the equilateral forest than those to the north. This data supports the late split theory, suggesting that the Bantu first crossed the equilateral forest before branching into two groups following migratory routes towards Eastern and Southern Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, if the late split theory were true, that would mean that Bantu could possibly have been dispersing throughout Africa at the same time when the children of Yasharel were being dispersed out of East Africa. And there you have a possible meeting of the two groups, and it seems to be possibly an assimilation to a certain degree of the two groups, essentially the Bantu taking in many of the people who are the Hebrews who are being dispersed out of East Africa. Now, there is some evidence to support this supposed meeting, particularly because the Central Sudanic populations at some point seem to have meshed in with the Bantu speakers. Sudanic languages are spoken from Cape Verde to the Great Lakes and further north to the Red Sea. If one were to compare the vocabulary roots of Bantu with those of monosyllabic and affixes of the Sudanic group, more than 1/3 of vocabulary are familiar to Bantu and Sudanese speakers alike. Today, Central Sudanic languages are found in the Central African Republic, Chad, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as Christopher Arrett wrote for Trans-African Journal of History. An interaction of these groups is likely to have happened as Bantus carry several terms of Central Sudanic origin. Reading from his article, taken together with the evidence of cattle terminology, data could be explained by hypothesizing an initial interaction between the earliest Eastern Bantu groups and Central Sudanic speakers in an undetermined location, and several subsequent periods of interaction between particular later Bantu groups and different Central Sudanic communities in several regions of Central Africa and Southern Africa. A detailed investigation of this hypothesis has since been undertaken. The results strongly support the general view of history offered in the hypothesis and as well add considerable elaboration to that picture. The basic evidence for this history consists of a number of Central Sudanic loanwords, sets variously distributed among Bantu languages. Since whole sets of loanwords in the absence of an evolved scholarly tradition are adopted only in situations of direct social interaction between the people adopting the words and the people from whose languages the words come, these borrowing set define various periods of contact between Bantu and Central Sudanic speaking communities. Now, an interesting add-on to this is the fact that the Ethiopian genome has really been found amongst many West African groups. Reading from Conspiracy to Erase a Nation, this language dispersion is compounded by the fact that the Ethiopian genome is shared with groups throughout Africa. For example, a study published by NIH found close Y chromosomes among Ethiopians, Kazan people in the South Africa, and Senegalese people. This gives us a window into the possible route taken by the Hebrew people as they fled their Arab and Berber oppressors. I also want to hit on one more point in regard to the Bantu and also their dispersion through the slave trade. Very interesting. You see Bantu really throughout the eastern part of the world because of this dispersion. Many people who do not necessarily know that they are Bantu, including people inside of India, Pakistan, Kafir. So again, reading from Conspiracy to Erase a Nation, contemporary Bantu society in Africa is primarily a result of the influx of hundreds of thousands of Bantu in the late 19th century due to the Arab slave trade, which has also led to scattered Bantu communities throughout Asia. Scattered Bantu communities in India, Sri Lanka, and nearby islands are known today as Sidi or Shidi in Pakistan and Kafir. While these groups initially spoke their African languages and practiced their culture, they have become Indianized and Arabized over time. So how interesting that the Arabs not only targeted the Oromo, as we have spoken about, but also directly targeted the Bantu people. So this is very interesting, obviously, if you think about the fact that the Bantu and the Hebrews seem to have meshed, seem to have possibly been absorbed. Many Hebrews seem to have been absorbed into that community. And from there, you can kind of see different ways that the Hebrews become dispersed throughout Africa. Obviously, they become dispersed in the south. And also, you're going to see in Central Africa and also all the way in West Africa, this mass dispersion of a people through the other people who are also migrating throughout Africa. So we're going to talk about next time is we're going to talk about the Africans in the East who are linked to these people of Yasharel, likely come directly from Yasharel. So we're going to talk about next time many of the people who are on the east side of Africa who are linked directly to Yasharel, not only through the Bantu dispersion, but also through a direct dispersion directly to the places where they now inhabit. But with that, I thank you all for watching. God willing, I'll see you in the next video.